All right. Welcome everyone to the Autism Job Club, the neurodiverse workforce in the new normal of employment with Michael Bernic. Your co-hosts today are me, Jill Escher, and Trudy Grable. Trudy, say hi.
Good morning, everyone.
I'm with Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area, and Trudy is with Parents Helping Parents, which is a wonderful nonprofit based here in the South Bay. So before we start, just to let you know, we already have 5 other webinars scheduled, and it looks like a few more are in the pipeline. They just haven't been announced yet. Our next webinar is with Ryan Wexelblatt, who is based in Pennsylvania. I saw him speak at the Autism Society of America conference in 2016, and he is phenomenal. He's a great speaker. He really gets these young men and the challenges they face in terms of hygiene and relationships and sexuality and dealing with girls, frankly. So he does a great job. That's in 2 weeks. And then week after that, we have Tom and Emily Island. A lot of you will remember them from our conference in December, speaking on autism in the criminal justice system and training people with autism and families with autism to interact with police and law enforcement. April 6th, we changed tune a bit to talk about a treatment called electroconvulsive therapy, I believe, which is for children on the and adults, I'm sorry, on the very severe end of the spectrum. And then we go to our friends at UCSF. We're going to be talking about their research projects and tell you how you can participate as well. May 25th, we have a huge, giant panel about social opportunities for adults on the spectrum here in the Bay Area. Hope you can join us. Register today. Hold on. All right, let's go to Mike. Trudy, do you want to introduce Mike?
I would be delighted to introduce Mike. So Mike is the author of the Autism Job Club. He directed the California Department of Labor through California Employment and Development Department for quite a number of years. He's been a research fellow with the Milken Institute since 2004, and he's counsel to the Sedgwick law firm located in San Francisco. Also on the board of Ascend, grad at Harvard College, Oxford University, and University of California, Berkeley School of Law. And he's one of us. He has a 27-year-old son on the autism spectrum.
And I want to note a little typo. Ascend is a nonprofit in San Francisco, AASCEND. That's my bad. So check out ascend with 2A's.org to learn more about that really fabulous nonprofit. Oops. And please note that if you have questions, you can type them into the question bar on the control panel. If the question bar doesn't work for some reason, you can use the chat bar and direct it to the organizers or the presenters. If you can't see the screen for some reason, we've been talking and you have no idea what to look at, sometimes it's hiding under your browser, so you might want to move windows around on your screen to find the presentation screen. All of you attendees are on mute, so you can be as loud as you want, and it's totally okay. And if you're calling in and you don't have access to a computer and want to ask a question, why don't you email those to trudy@php.com. And as I said, the webinar is running, is being recorded, and we are planning for it to run for 1 hour, okay, not up to 2 hours.
Also, if you just can't figure out how to send a question on the webinar, just email me as well. I've got it open in a parallel window, and I'll look at it right away.
Okay. All right. So we are changing presenters. Hold on. Uh-oh.
You just made me the presenter, Jill.
Hold on. It's supposed to be moving. Wait just 1 second. As I said, apologize in advance for any little glitches along the way. Hey, Mike?
Yes?
All right. I've made you the presenter. Um,
So people
you
should
need
be
to,
able to see my screen now.
yeah, so I think you may need to click something on your screen so that you can begin your presentation.
I don't see anything, Jill, on my
Oh,
screen.
no.
Jill, I think I'm still the presenter, Jill.
Okay.
Okay, I show my screen. I'll click on this.
There
There
you
you
go.
go.
All
Okay.
Okay,
right.
good, good, good.
Sorry about that, people.
All right, well, why don't I get started? We got a lot to cover today, guys, and I appreciate the opportunity, Jill. I want to make this, I should say from the start, more of a discussion. I'll go through, I do have about 20 slides and 5 different parts, but let me encourage anyone who has questions during this or thoughts or comments. I really want to make this more of a discussion. I've been in the autism community now since 1991. When I entered or first got involved, if people knew about autism, they might know about it from Rain Man, but otherwise there is very little public consciousness in 1991 and very little knowledge. Today, of course, you can't pick up a newspaper or turn on the TV or go to a movie without some reference to autism. Whenever I mention the book, The Autism Job Club, people say, oh, hey, I have a niece or nephew or relative or neighbor on the spectrum. So it's reached a whole different level of public consciousness. It's all in popular culture. And yet, despite this, in terms of employment, our community really hasn't changed that much since 1991. Certainly the employment rates haven't changed that much. The official or estimated employment rates. And what I want to do today is discuss the very positive things going on. And there is a great deal of energy, enormous amount of energy, largely grassroots, largely outside of government, going on today. What some of these initiatives are, more practically, what are some tips in terms of at least the ones I use as a volunteer job coach for people on the spectrum, and then some of the challenges we have and why this rate is still very high and some opportunities looking forward. So let me get started on the first part, snapshot of sort of autism employment in March 2017. As I say, there is a great deal of energy and activity in employment initiatives, an extensive infrastructure of job placement activities. And despite this, the estimated rates, and it's very hard to get good figures. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does keep data, but only on, quote, adults with disabilities. And even that is, I think, very loose data. And the estimates are largely employment in any serious or steady level at about 30% of our community or lower. Let me first talk about the positive things in terms of some of these initiatives. First, there are the initiatives going on in major firms. That's really grown, Jill, in the last last 5 years and continues to grow. There are autism at work initiatives in major firms. Microsoft, of course, has its Autism at Work program, SAP, among the tech firms. In non-tech firms, Deloitte, Ford has an autism initiative, Willis Towers Watson. And so these are initiatives not only saying we're open to hiring people on the autism spectrum, but initiatives targeted at specifically at hiring from our community. So that's changed. That's something that's different, and it's growing. Every year there are new firms here in the Bay Area where I am. Facebook is looking at increasing its neurodiversity hiring. Airbnb has a new coordinator of diversity, including neurodiversity, and Salesforce has a very active effort among some of our bigger firms. So this is something we're seeing in large firms, often pushed, by the way, by parents or other relatives who are in these firms. But I see this as a very promising development and one that we want to continue to work on. Second, there are the autism-focused businesses that continue to be launched. Most of us know of Rising Tide Car Wash, which is the car wash based in Florida but expanding. Ultra Testing, the software company based in New York. Spectrum Designs, platinum-based software, other software companies, and then some, again, outside of the tech industry, Chocolate Spectrum, Smile Biscotti, all businesses, small businesses, hopefully growing, but small businesses aimed particularly at hiring from our community. And the third area of employment initiatives is that of what I might call self-employment and internet-based creative collectives. These are efforts like Picasso Einstein, the Autistic Creatives Collective, the Art of Autism, that try to take the goods and services produced by people in our community and market them collectively on the internet. So these are all things or efforts just within the past, I would say, 5 years that have developed and that are continuing to grow. They, in fact, build on an extensive network that does exist, already existed prior to 5 years ago, that's been available to our community and government. So that here in California, we have services through the Department of Rehab and regional centers. We have additional targeted initiatives. Our state Department of Labor, the Employment Development Department that I used to head, has a disability employment initiative. Our employment training panel has an initiative called No More Barriers. Our California Workforce Development Board has an accelerated targeted adults with disabilities. And our community college system in California, which is the largest system in the world, it's got 2.2 million students, has a sizable and growing DSPS services division. That's, again, I don't like the term disabled, but for now at least it's a term that's used at the disabled services part of the California community colleges offer employment services.
Mean? What does DSPS mean?
Disabled Students Program Services. I hate the term. I hate the term, and at some point soon we will get rid of that term disabled, Jill, but for now that's the term that is often used, as you know, and our community colleges use.
Okay.
So what we see today is these 3 areas of initiative: major firms, autism-focused businesses, the internet collectives, built on top of this infrastructure that already exists within government and is fairly robust in terms of placement efforts. So people often, I hear, who are outside of our community say, well, nothing's being done or there's no opportunities. In fact, there's a great deal, enormous amount of activity going on, often below the surface, but in terms of employment efforts. Now, despite all this, as I said at the very start of the presentation, the employment rates for adults with developmental differences, and particularly in the autism community, remain very low. Again, rough estimates about 70% not working steadily. I would also add, though I think it's really exciting what we see going on at SAP or Microsoft, the number of people served by these initiatives is very modest. So Microsoft, everyone loves the initiative, and we owe them, but we're talking about 20 people, 22 people, I think now up in Redmond, a handful of people here in the Bay Area, not a lot. SAP, which everyone knows about, we may be talking about 100 or so nationwide. These others are equally modest in size. So one, within the major employers, we see very modest. The autism-focused businesses and self-employment initiatives are still, frankly, struggling in nearly all cases to find stability. Ultra testing, which is one of the best in terms of the software testing ones, has less than 30 employees, and many of them part-time. So, I mean, they're all struggling for the most part. And the self-employment initiatives similarly are trying to find the markets. And the reason's pretty direct in terms of the overall employment rate. Even though the national unemployment rate is now below 5%, even though the unemployment rates in some of our California counties are now below 4%, here in San Francisco we're at 3.2%, competition for nearly all jobs remains sizable. So that even here in San Francisco, 3.2% unemployment. For most jobs, Jill, as you know, I work as a volunteer job counselor, and for most jobs that we apply for, they're getting 10 or more applicants. It's not like there are jobs out there that are just getting no applicants, or even though employers say they can't find workers, what they're really talking about in nearly all cases is they can't find workers at what they want to pay, or workers who have the precise skills, because in terms of job applications, they still remain sizable. So that's sort of an overview, and we'll come back to that. Now, often people want to know not just what's the overview, but how do I work with someone? And so I want to go in part two now to turn to what does it mean. There's the overall sort of policy direction for our community. We might turn now to what does it mean in terms of working with someone on an individual basis. Where do we stand? What are some of the approaches that at least some of us who have been in the field for, I've been in the field since 1979, but what we sort of would recommend. And I had four sort of recommendations. The overview, one is don't go it alone. Try to connect with a job coach. We'll talk about that. Second is utilizing the public workforce system. I mentioned the Department of Rehab and Regional Center in California, and other states have a similar infrastructure. Definitely want to take advantage of it. It's not the answer in most cases, but it could be part of the answer. We'll talk about using all of our networks, being a helicopter parent in the extreme. And then I want to say something about how the labor force has changed, or the structure of job markets has changed, and how we want to look at not only jobs, but opportunities to get in the door through part-time work and other even volunteer opportunities when well structured. So let's turn to don't go it alone. I think two things are simultaneously true, Jill. One, you want to do everything possible, but two, you don't want to do it alone. Try to get a job coach. And there's some very good job coaches. Eva Libra here in the Bay Area, Jan Johnston-Tyler is excellent. These are people who specialize in working with our community. And often these coaches are, quote, vendorized by the Department of Rehab and or regional centers, or the equivalents in other states. So that even if, we'll get on to why you want to be part of rehab and regional centers and have everyone we know be registered with them, but then these Department of Rehab regional centers will often pay for the job coaches. And if you can find a job coach to work with, or as you find a job coach to work with, the point is not to turn it over to them, but to work in concert. So the first thing I'd say is try to find a job coach, particularly one who can be vendorized. Now, within the public workforce system, the vendorized job coach is the most direct form, and the first thing I'd recommend. Find a job coach who's vendorized, get registered with Department of Rehab or regional centers or the equivalent, and work together with that job coach. But there are also other opportunities in the public workforce system that are worth looking at. One is nearly everyone, all adults in our community should be eligible for services through the public workforce system, the local workforce development boards, and the one-stop system of job placement. These are public workforce systems that are open to everyone, and but that have particular focus on so-called targeted populations, of which our community is one. So I think those provide opportunities. And of course, any of our members who go to colleges or community colleges or other post-secondary institutions, in most cases, as I mentioned above, these colleges and community colleges today have workability programs that provide paid work experience and have other job placement assistance. So there is a lot out there, depending on where one is in terms of transition in particular, a lot out there in the public workforce system that is free and that is available to people in our community, and I would utilize it. Now, I mentioned the job coach and the same thing, and also the other elements of the public workforce system. I also think it's very important, most important, for family members to be involved, to do everything they can. There's a lot of writing today, has been over the past couple decades, criticizing helicopter parents. A lot of self-righteous writing. Forget about all that. I don't think it makes sense generally, but it certainly doesn't make sense for our community. We need to be helicopter parents when it comes to employment. And that's because, as I mentioned before, despite what the official unemployment rates say nationwide or in California or in San Francisco, the competition for nearly all jobs is high. And for the better jobs, employers are getting tens, if not hundreds, of applications. I know any of our major firms like Salesforce, Facebook, Google will tell you they get thousands of applicants. So the competition for jobs is high, and we need to do everything possible. And networking remains the very best way of job placement. I recommend people use job boards, but job boards themselves have very, very limited utility. In nearly all cases, you want to use networks. The best way to get into a firm is by a referral by someone in that particular firm. And so I think it's a combination of today in terms of placements of working with job coach or other government entities, placement entities, as well as directly using one's network. And by network, I mean reaching out to family members or friends who may work in various firms, see who has contacts, how you can utilize these contacts to either get that most important element of referral by someone in the firm, or do it some other way, 1 degree or 2 degrees of separation. But the networking is key. And the fourth element I'd say on this individual job search is what none of us like, but I think it is patience. Most job searches take time. When I first started in the employment field, as I say, in 1979, you could send out a few resumes. Often you delivered them by hand, and you could expect to get an interview, if not a job. And today, of course, it's much different. Now you can apply to 50 jobs online and often get no response. And I tell people they should be looking at least 30 to 40 jobs. And the need to apply widely. The positive thing, it's like other areas of life, you don't need, this isn't an election, all you need is one job placement. So I think it's important to remember patience and the need to just get one. And finally, to look not only at jobs, but other opportunities to get in the door. Because hiring is so tough everywhere today, the opportunity to get in the door, or opportunities to get in the door, become important. And by get in the door, I'm referring to part-time employment whenever possible, contingent employment, and project-based employment. And often also volunteer employment, though with volunteer employment, I would say the important thing there is that it be well-structured in terms of clear duties, and that there, if possible, be some opportunity, if the job is well done or the volunteer activity is well done, to move into a steady job.
Mike, can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Yeah, so for example, I'm the parent of two kids who are nonverbal and fairly severely impacted with autism, and there's not a prayer in the world that they would ever attain competitive employment, with competitive wages. And there's been a strong movement in the disability world to shy away from sort of volunteer or sub-minimum wage activities, what are sometimes called sheltered workshops or related forms of organizations, and towards a competitive employment model. Well, I think that's great for a lot of people, but for people like my kids and hundreds of thousands like them, it's not at all realistic. So I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit about this policy shift you see at the federal and maybe even the state level, and with the implications of that for these more severely impacted kids.
Well, you raise a very good point. I think it's been one problem with our autism community, is that we have often overlooked a large part of our community, those who are more severely impacted. And it's something going forward we need to do. My own view is that we do need sheltered workshops. They need to be in a different form, but that's something we need to get back to. Again, perhaps differently structured, but that's one tool you mentioned. But I think we've got to look at other approaches. There's no reason, Jill, that everyone in our community shouldn't find some work activity, and we can't just focus on I don't like the term, but the so-called high functioning, as is often done. So that's a very good point. I don't cover it as much in this presentation. I do discuss it a little bit in the Autism Job Club. There's a chapter on the more severely impacted in our community, but there's no question that going forward, we've got to look at work structures for all components of the community, not just those who may be in so-called competitive employment, though even in those situations, I think we've got to look at trying to change the culture in companies, because a lot of our community members do get jobs and they lose the jobs. Yeah. So I think even there we need changes in structure of employment.
Okay, go ahead. I'll get to more questions later, but go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, no, as people have questions, let's bring them up now. But I think that the issue of the more severely impacted is here. I just missed something. Is one we want to touch, keep in front of us and get back to today. As I say, there are 5 parts, so let me move on to part 3 and then 4 and 5, and then I do want to get on to the more severe. I think it's important, we've talked about sort of some of the initiatives. We've talked about working with people on a one-to-one basis, people we know, family members or others who we might want to help. I think it's also very important that as a community we work together, not only for people we know, but helping each other in job search and utilization of networks, and also job clubs. And let's turn to here, helping each other in job search. You mentioned Ascend, and I am part of Ascend. I wandered into a meeting with my son, an Ascend meeting, Ascend, our adult autism group, in November of 2011. He was completing college, and we were, I was looking for sort of what are the networks for adults. And this was a Ascend meeting. It was in a small community college classroom downtown here in San Francisco. I can't even remember, Jill, what we discussed, but I remember thinking to myself, I'm home. After all these years, I'm finally come home. So I've been involved with Ascend. I feel comfortable there. It's the main thing I do in terms of outside activities. But I think Ascend works on a lot of levels. There are other groups like Ascend throughout the country, and there should be even more. What it is completely extra-governmental. It's volunteer. It's a partnership of family members, adults on the spectrum, and advocates. And one thing we do is we work together, try to use each of our networks to help each other in terms of job referrals. We're not always successful. Often we're not successful. In most cases we're not, but at least we try to work together. And I think that's an important model. Can't rely on government, working outside of government. And I think related to that, I mentioned these initiatives in major firms. I think parents, if we look at these initiatives in Walgreens, SAP, they've been started by parents. So I think as well as that individual one-to-one helping each other, we want to, whenever possible, try to look at what employers we may be if we're in a company that can help the employees, especially a sizable number of people. Is there some way to try to influence that company behavior to start an initiative? And again, the Job Club and the Autism-Focused Businesses and Collective, I go back to my Ascend experience. At Ascend, we have a Job Club. A Job Club is no more than mutual support, people voluntarily working together on job placement. Our Job Club at Ascend, we meet on a monthly basis. We meet at the ARC building down at 11th and Howard here in San Francisco. We have speakers. We have a speaker coming up this Saturday from Airbnb, who's David King, who's the diversity director. We have someone from LinkedIn coming in April, someone from Pinterest coming in May. But these are all people to talk about how do you get hired at my firm, what is the hiring process, and give us general advice. And then the second hour we have volunteers working one-to-one with people. I like the Job Club. I think this mutual support is a key element. And similarly, we have at Ascend this Autistic Creatives Collective. It's still in its initial stages. It was brought to us by Donald Cohen, who's a parent in Southern California, whose son, Colin, is involved in certain creative activities. He has done a children's book. He does other drawing and animation. And so I don't know how successful this is going to be, but it's the same thing. It's completely an initiative put together by Donald and other parents. We've got a website, the Autistic Creatives Collective. And down in Southern California, of course, there's the Art of Autism that does somewhat similar attempt to market the goods and services of creatives in our community. And I think these ways in which we work together, again, outside of government, are an important part of what we're going to do going forward. Let me turn now to an area of employment for our community that I think is very promising. It's still in the very initial stages, but that I'm part of, and that is public service employment. I got involved in it after so many years of seeing the difficulty in competitive employment. I began to think, is there some way? It's sort of a variant of sheltered workshops, but is there some way that we can not just give people in our community job search advice and work with them to find jobs, but actually give people jobs, have jobs that we can place people in, at least on a transitional basis, working for perhaps a year to get work experience, paid work experience. I believe all of this should be paid. And so we've started a project here in California of public service employment. In other words, hiring people from our autism community directly. Now, public service employment largely has fallen out of favor since the late 1970s. I don't know if anyone on this webinar remembers the CETA program, but that's when I got started. In the 70s, we had under CETA, the federal workforce program, a program of public service employment where people who were unemployed were hired directly to do certain jobs within the government. It was sort of an updated version of the WPA of the 1930s, which everyone has sort of a fond memory of, all the major structures built, the dams, other major structures built during the WPA. CETA didn't really have the same capital-intensive focus, but it provided jobs in the public sector. It fell out of favor for good reason in terms of many of the jobs turned out to be not very productive jobs, and there are other shortcomings. But I think the area of public service employment in the past decade has been making a comeback, and I think it's something we in the autism community need to look at. And among the targeted groups, public service employment in New York a few years back started a program of public service employment for adults on the TANF or welfare system, hiring people directly. In Milwaukee, also a few years back, they started the New Hope Project to hire people directly. In that case, it was from low-income communities. But again, it differs from most of what we do in workforce, which is to try to train or give people job search skills, to hiring people directly. So I began to think out here with Lou Vismira, who's a prominent cardiologist and activist in our autism community, is there something, a form of public service employment for our community for adults with autism? And that's what we have been working on, and it'll be formally launched in May. I think it could be a model for other states in terms of hiring people directly. Basically, out here in California, we have something called the California Conservation Corps, in many ways modeled after the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s. And it was established in 1976 by Governor Brown, then Governor Brown, now Governor Brown again. And it hires, the CCC hires youth directly, often at-risk youth, to engage in certain productive activities of usually firefighting, usually outdoor activities, though they've now gotten into energy audits. So what we're trying to build is a sort of segment of the CCC that will focus on people, youth in our communities. We're starting, as I say, in May, and Lou Vismira is the person in our community. He's as I say, he's a prominent cardiologist who has become an activist, and his focus is on services for seniors. So the idea would be to start with 10 or 15 people in our community, youth, who can be employed and paid for providing services to seniors. And we've got a handful of senior centers who have offered to provide jobs. So I think more to come on this in terms of where we want to go with it and how it succeeds. But I think, Jill, this is an area, public service employment, direct jobs, for really the spectrum of people, and the more severe that we ought to be looking at. That's what I meant by a variation of the sheltered workshop. It's paid employment.
Thanks for sharing that. I hadn't heard about that initiative. That's very cool.
Yeah, we're just starting it, but I think this whole area of public service employment, in other words, as we move in the autism community, it's not just placing people into jobs. We ought to be looking at public service jobs that can be targeted to a spectrum of people in our communities, and we're just starting with services to seniors. You can see how that works on a number of levels, intergenerational, but it's something we want to hope to expand. So I want to keep the group in touch on that. And finally, in part 5, I do want to say what's different is in some ways linked to what I first talked about in part 1 on these autism initiatives. What I think is very encouraging is this whole acceptance or interest in so-called neurodiversity. Our friend Dr. Hackey Reitman down in Florida has his Neurodiversity Institute and Different Brains, and this whole idea, it's not new, but I think it's gained some real traction and force in the past couple of years, and I think the good news is that more and more companies are recognizing and beginning to think how neurodiversity can be adopted not only as a sort of public service good, but how it might improve the product. Are there ways that by hiring people of different neurodiverse conditions, can that provide a better product? And there's a lot of discussion here in the Bay Area, particularly in the tech community, in terms of how it might do that. So I want to flag that. Just like public service employment, I would say it's still in a nascent situation, but it's one that we want to look at. And finally, where do we go from here? In some ways, a summary. I think we all, I would say there are 6 areas we want to look at trying to build in 2017 and beyond. The autism coaches and individual efforts, we want to continue to improve those. We want to continue to improve, I think, the pooling of resources and job clubs. I think we want to keep pushing these initiatives in major firms, small numbers now, but hopefully larger numbers. I think these autism-focused businesses, though most are struggling, they do provide not the solution, but one solution. Similarly, I think these autism-focused creatives collectives are a solution. And as I say, I think they're very promising in terms of, though it's just in an initial stage, public service employment. So, Jill, I know I've probably gone over. Let me say most of all, well, good. I thought I have now 10:46, so I know we have just a few minutes left. Let me emphasize finally, this is my contact information. I think, Jill, everyone can see it. Mm-hmm. People should feel free to email me or call me. Email is probably best. And I think we're all in this. I feel, at least, Jill, I know you do too. We're all in this together. So if there's anything I can do to be of help.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation. I learned a lot. I'd like to invite people to submit questions in the, you can see there's a little question bar there. You can just type into the little field. Trudy and I can check them out. I'll start out, and if Trudy sees anything else, I see there are a number of questions. So we can go past 11 o'clock. We don't, like, it's not like we turn into pumpkins or anything. So If it takes a little more time, bear with us, okay?
Yeah, and again, if anyone wants to email me, I think everyone has this on their, who has the computers, Jill, they have my contact
Yeah, and
information,
if
don't
they're
they? Okay,
listening
good.
in, it's name.name@sedgwicklaw.com,
Right.
michael.bernic@sedgwicklaw.com.
Yeah, and if
Okay,
anyone Googles me, they can easily, that contact will come up.
okay, thanks. So here's just a really good question. Actually, I hear this a lot. It's a question about self-identification when interviewing or when performing a job. So this person's son is on the high end of the spectrum, and he's good academically and has good computer skills, but he's socially challenged with Asperger's and is lonely. And uh, you don't really see off the bat that he needs help. So there's a question about whether or not this young man should disclose his high-functioning autism or Asperger's when he's looking for work. Would he be, quote, marked as disabled because from a capability-wise perspective, he is not. But would disclosure somehow protect him and help people understand some of his idiosyncrasies? What are your thoughts?
Well, this is first of all, let me say, her son sounds like everyone in my son and nearly everyone in our Ascend group. So we've been there. I think disclosure is an issue that's an ongoing one. I will tell you my own view is definitely to disclose, unless there are strong reasons to not, for a couple reasons. One, I think people, because going back to this point about popular culture, because everyone is connected these days in some way to someone in our community, people are a lot more understanding than there were in 1991. So I think rather than be a negative, in some ways it can be a positive. Some people say, hey, wait, yeah, I know about autism. I have a niece or nephew. They may have not a detailed knowledge, but they have some connection. So I think it can be a positive, actually. Then I think also, it's going to sort of, as I say with my son, it's going to come out anyway. So better to bring it up at the start and look at, if there is going to be a fit or if there isn't. But I think in most cases it's become a positive in a way it wasn't 10 or 20 years ago. So I would think unless there's some good reason not to, disclosing is upfront and presenting in such a way, of course, that I'm someone on the spectrum, or often the job coach comes along with the interview and explains, but someone on the spectrum, and here are some issues, but that may seem unusual or strange, but it's part of this condition. But I think we in the autism community, Jill, benefit from the demographics, and it's changed, and in many ways is a positive today.
Okay, let's move on. Here's another really good question. So, it's one thing, says this asker, to get a job, but then, you need supports once that person is at the job to succeed at work, right? So, for example, to manage executive functioning and social demands of work. So can you give some examples of supports that can help these adults be successful in their jobs?
Yes, we have, in most cases, for example, the Department of Rehab, if you're a rehab client or regional center, you will get a job coach. That job coach will not end once the job is found. The job coach will work, is paid to work, and under the statutes here in California, is eligible for reimbursement, will work with the person for however long it takes after after the job is obtained, for however long it takes to learn the skills, including the social skills on the job. So I think that's an important part, having the job coach, which should be provided anyways, once the job, and work with the employer to try to figure out what's the best way of integrating the job coach and the job coach assistant in the process. And again, there's usually not a set time. It's usually until the person is able to. But of course, that's retention remains a big issue, and that's why I think as a community we also have to work on trying to change the culture in workplaces to at least allow for far more patience for people in our community.
Hey, Mike, we have so many questions. I'm going to try to get through as many as I can, but okay. I do want to mention the extremely knowledgeable Alicia Halliday tells us that there is a new study that shows that those who disclosed their ASD diagnosis to their employer were 3 times more likely to be employed than those that did not disclose.
I'd like to see that study. It makes, Joe, I'd like to see that study. Yeah. It makes sense to me. It makes sense. I don't see, as I say, I think that's the way to go.
Great bit of information. Yeah, you know what? If I can find the link, I'll have Alicia send it to me. We can, when we do the post-mortem, not the post-mortem, the post-webinar email, we can include that. I think that would be an interesting point. Okay. Oh my gosh, there's so many questions. I am going to go through some of them. Could you please explain about the Ticket to Work program that is offered by Social Security? Is that something that helps the autism community?
Well, I got to be honest, I don't know that it helps much. Ticket to Work has origin in the Clinton administration. This was back in the late 90s, and the idea was to incentivize, financially incentivize companies to place people in our community and other so-called disability communities, and the idea is that when somebody is, if I'm a placement agency, I place someone, I can be reimbursed if they stay on the job for a certain amount that they otherwise would have gotten in their Social Security payments. The idea was to get people off of SSI and SSDI more quickly, because now the current system is such, and it has been for some time, the very few people who are on SSDI and SSI ever get off each year. I think the numbers each year are less than 3% get off the rolls. So this was an attempt to, the big thinkers of the Clinton administration to come up with financially. The problem is that they could never work out a financial model that really incentivized placements. The money came only over a period of time after people had been on the job for some time, and I think the number of so-called tickets is minuscule. The number of, so yeah, it's not a bad thing. There's nothing bad, there's nothing negative about using the Ticket to Work program. It just hasn't resulted in many placements in our community or other so-called disability communities.
Okay. Here's a comment. Maybe you can provide some feedback on it. One of the things that I have envisioned is that many small businesses hire just one person with disabilities. There are many little jobs that can be carved out. And it is so much easier to accommodate one person in a workplace than it is to try to accommodate a wide range of challenges. So that's that mother's experience, and I've seen that at times too. Any thoughts?
Well, if we, all good. I mean, if you can carve out a, with a small business, even a part-time job, hey, great. It's just, usually very difficult, and those jobs are usually much more fragile. I mean, let's be honest. All the jobs for our community are fragile, but these are even more so. So it's great if you can do it. It's just getting companies to do that.
Okay. Hello. Can you explain the different options for employment support through the regional centers? Supported employment, tailored day services, etc. So for those who aren't maybe California people listening in on this, just so you understand, in California we have a regional center system. And for those with qualifying developmental disabilities, but not all developmental disabilities, you get to become a client of what's called the regional center, and they provide state-funded services through your lifespan. And that can include things like day programs, supported employment, etc. So, and other people who don't qualify because maybe they're considered, Mike hates this term, too high functioning, they would not be
Yeah, I don't like
qualified
that
for this
term.
particular subset of services. But Mike, maybe you can comment specifically about what regional centers offer.
Well, I think there are two things. That's a good question. One is, as I mentioned, it's valuable to sign up if you know someone on the spectrum, or if you're on the spectrum, sign up for rehab services, which are easier to get, frankly, than regional center. Regional centers are more severely impacted, but the regional centers are, if you can get them, are even better, more extensive services, and they have a range of services. There is supported work by which they can subsidize a job coach and a work environment. There are the day programs that are sometimes under the rubric of work experience. So these are all just, well, I would say there are a range of services that can be offered under regional centers, but what's important today is why it's valuable to be a regional center client, because they do have and are under state law required to provide these employment services for free.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A couple people have asked, hey, Mike, can we get copies of your slides? And
Yes,
you've already sent them to me, and so we can simply upload them to the webinars
definitely.
page on the Okay, so what we will do is we'll upload the slides to the webinars page on sfautismsociety.org, and we'll just have a link right there to a PDF.
And Jill, I think it's also worth, for the group, Jill referred me, sent me yesterday something she received from the BBC, which is doing a new program. There's a BBC program called Employable Me, which they follow people. It's sort of a documentary. They follow people in our community and their job searches, and they try to bring in so-called experts and follow the job placement. Well, they're doing an American version of that now, and they're looking for adults on the autism spectrum who might be willing to participate. That is, people who are having difficulty in job search. So, Joe, I don't know if it's possible to also, with my slides, put on that one-page thing about Employable Me.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're
yeah, I can maybe just add a separate link to that, but sure,
yes.
That's not a problem.
Okay, that would be great. I think it's worth people on the webinar are looking at that.
Okay, there's so many more questions. I'm going to run through a few,
okay.
one of them.
I'll be fast. And then...
What are possible ways of individuals helping to create new opportunities and initiatives within the area of public service employment? How are these initiatives formed, floated, and funded, and by whom?
To be continued. Get in touch with me. I mean, it's just in a very initial stage. It's just something we're, Lou and I, and Lou is also the founder of the Mind Institute, that we're trying to do out here in California. I believe that beyond the competitive employment, Jill, we need a form of public service employment that's paid to members of our community. And we don't need public service employment generally. We need it for target our community. So
I think that maybe this mom was asking more about, like, what could she do in her own local community? Is there anything that she could do short of going to Sacramento and saying, let's start a new program? Are there other local agencies, local public entities that may have something they could carve out, short of having a statewide initiative?
Well, they could carve out, but so far what we found here in the Bay Area, and I think throughout California, is that these public entities are very difficult to get into. I know they're my son graduated from Cal State East Bay a couple of years ago. He's applied for probably 60 or 70 of these office tech jobs. These are the office assistant or office tech. These are the low-level, entry-level jobs in state government. We've applied probably literally for 60 or 70. My view is that he doesn't have the executive functions, and in his case, we need some safe harbor like government employment to have any stability in the future. So we've really focused on some of these government jobs, particularly in state government. they're still getting, even with the economy being so good, most of these jobs get 40 or 50 applicants. And this is for office tech or office assistant, the very entry-level jobs. So, yeah, there are jobs in state and city government. They're usually very competitive, even the very entry-level ones. And that's why my sense is we need to look at other jobs, other structures outside of the normal civil service.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. Here's a good question. My question is about job coaching. And if there are other sources than Evo Libre is an agency, a private agency down here in San Jose that works with, Asperger's, and DOR, Department of Rehabilitation. For DOR, you can't be a student while looking for a job, she says. So
yes,
if
that's
my
true.
son, okay, so if my son is looking for a part-time job while going to community college, they won't help him. He doesn't have regional center.
No.
So unfortunately, we are limited to access to vendorized services. Do you have advice?
Yeah, wait. Let me say, yes, that's true. Under DOR, they're looking for people who are, looking for work outside of school. But there is, assuming he is a DOR client, he doesn't need to be a regional center client. Doesn't need to be in the regional center, but he does need to be in DOR. If he's a Department of Rehab client, he's eligible to be part of the, quote, workability program. And that's a program that the community colleges have, the state universities have, even UC has workability on the various campuses that is paid part-time, and usually part-time employment. So I don't know if he's already registered with DOR, he should be, I would focus, just center on this workability opportunity. I think that's the best opportunity they have going, rather than trying to. They should also be willing to work with him to get a part-time job, but especially this workability 4 is worth focusing on.
And I just want to add to that for those listening who are concerned about SSI losing their benefit because of working while being a student, any student under 22 years of age who's regularly attending school may exclude earnings from the income, and they can earn a maximum of $7,180 a year. And that's excluded from SSI.
That's a good point.
You do have to report it, but it's excluded.
Okay. Thanks for adding that.
Sure.
Somebody asked, how do I get a video of this presentation? This is being recorded, and so when we get the recording, we'll post it on the website, and it'll probably be sent out to those who registered as well, that link. Okay, here's a very broad question, and I'll just shoot you one more after this.
Okay.
What can be done to prepare a student for future employment while still in high school? The focus is on getting credits and getting into college. So it's a pragmatic mom asking a pragmatic question about pre-transition. And this is very, I just heard a Temple Grandin talk last week, and this was really her point. Like, why aren't we doing more in high school to prepare people for trades and for hands-on jobs and bring back tech shop and bring back, all these things that we used to do that weren't so academic or so college focused, and more vocational in orientation. So do you have any thoughts about using high school to these kids?
Yeah, I mean, this is a part of a broader discussion we have in California and nationwide concerning the role of vocational education, and been ongoing. My own view, I'd have to know the particular skills and interests of the person, and I don't think college is right for everyone or everyone in our community. I do encourage people who are interested in our community to do that. I mean, I think the nature of the work world in the United States is, as it always has been, continues to evolve. I think in high school, learning the sort of basic skills and critical thinking and as much as possible is key for people in our community, like everywhere else. Rushing into a vocation could be a way, but it is a balancing. I think after high school, there's always the opportunity, if not going on to college, to go into more specified and targeted vocational programs, which often often are within 6 months, but certainly within a year or two. So I don't think it's an either or. It's not, in the European systems, you had to make a choice much earlier in terms of vocational or academic. Here in the United States, we've always had a much more flexible system.
Okay. I'm going to ask just this one last question. Maybe I'll squeeze in one more. For someone who isn't a regional center client, if DOR determines that someone isn't, quote, employment ready or employable and isn't willing to offer job search support, what are they obligated to offer instead?
Well, if you're a DOR client, they should be offering either, if you're a community college student or so forth, work experience, often through Workability, or they should be offering job placement or job preparation for placement. That's their mission. So I would say definitely there needs to be something. The person is eligible for some services, either direct job placement, or if they say, well, he's not ready to be placed directly, then they need some other individual employment plan activity to get that person into that employability mode.
Okay. And I'll use this as the last question, and we'll call it a day. It sort of harkens to an earlier question, but maybe is a little more specific. So say you're in a job and you need, and I guess this is really an ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act sort of question.
Right.
And you need accommodations in order to, do your job and keep your job because of, symptoms related to your autism. What are some of those accommodations that you might be aware of in the work world?
Well, as I say, the main one that I've focused on is a job coach, continuing through often paid for by the regional center or DOR for as long as the person is needed. In terms of other accommodations, that's less, you're right, Jill, that's less a DOR and regional center and more sort of a general legal ADA, and I'm just not that focused on that.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit uncharted territory. I don't know much about it either, but it's a good question.
Yeah, I would say, though, it is a good question. I would say the main thing is try to get the job coach. I think that is more important than anything else.
Okay, good. Trudy or Mike, do you have any closing comments before we close out this webinar?
None from me right now. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I would just like to say, Jill, I'm glad you put this together. I would encourage people, anyone who wants to contact me to do so. I think we're all in this together.
Yeah, and I regret not asking all of the questions, but we're already 12 minutes over.
Yeah.
And you have his contact information, and you know where to reach him. And I will post on that website, sfautismsociety.org/webinars, the slides, the link to the video, so the actual presentation, the Employable Me link that Michael mentioned,
Right.
and maybe the study about 3 times job retention with people.
Yeah, that would be good. And a lot of it is, yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you, Michael, especially for a terrific webinar. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.